Over 700,000 people live on a piece of land larger than all of Western Europe combined. That is Alaska. But here is the strange part. Rhode Island, a state so small you can drive across it in less than an hour, has more people than Alaska. If you split Alaska in two, each half would still be larger than Texas. And if you were to lay Alaska over a map of the United States, it would stretch from California all the way to Georgia. And yet, the place is almost empty. Why? Everyone thinks the answer is the cold. But that's not it. Norway is cold, Canada is cold, Siberia is even colder. Those places are populated. The cold is never the real reason. What keeps people out of Alaska is something deeper, more mysterious, and in many cases, more terrifying than anything you have ever imagined. Because every day, an average of 6 people disappear here, without a trace, without any evidence. They just vanish. And most of this happens in an area people call the Alaska Triangle. You have heard of the Bermuda Triangle. You know the stories of missing ships, of airplanes vanishing in the middle of the Caribbean. But the Bermuda Triangle, throughout its history, has only claimed over 50 ships and 20 airplanes. Alaska has swallowed more than 20,000 people, just since the 1970s. That is a number that makes you stop and read it again. How can an American state swallow tens of thousands of people without a trace? Why is one of the most terrifying places on Earth located right within United States territory? And why, despite knowing all this, do people still come here? The answer begins with the map. If you look at a map of the United States, you will see Alaska completely set apart in the top left corner, bordered by Canada to the east and south, the Arctic Ocean to the north, and the Pacific Ocean to the west. It is not just distant. It is as if it is in another world. But when you zoom in on the map, when you start to look at the 3 points that form the Alaska Triangle, that is when the story truly begins. The 3 vertices of this triangle are Anchorage in the south, Juneau in the southeast, and Utqiagvik at the northernmost point, where the sun disappears for 2 whole months in winter. If you draw 3 straight lines connecting those 3 points, you'll outline a triangle larger than many European countries. Inside that triangle is what geographers call a lethal terrain, boreal forests so dense that sunlight cannot reach the ground. The Alaska Range rises with peaks covered in year-round snow, massive glaciers filled with hidden caves, crevasses tens of meters deep that fresh snow can completely cover in just one night. Millions of lakes are scattered everywhere like broken mirrors. And beyond all that is an endless tundra, as flat and cold as the surface of the moon. In this region, a compass can be off by up to 30 degrees due to a phenomenon called magnetic declination. 30 degrees might not sound like much, but when you are trying to navigate through a trackless forest in a whiteout, being off by 30 degrees can send you in the complete opposite direction without you even realizing it. This is precisely why the Alaska Triangle does not need anything supernatural to swallow people whole. The geography itself does all the work. But you have to wonder, how long has this land existed? Who were the first people to set foot here? And what happened to them? To understand Alaska, you have to go back 15,000 years. At the end of the Ice Age, when sea levels were hundreds of meters lower than today, a vast land bridge connecting Asia and North America ran right through where the Bering Strait is now. It was called Beringia. And across that land bridge, the first groups of people from Siberia walked into the Americas. They were the ancestors of Alaska's native peoples. The Tlingit, the Athabaskan, the Yupik, the Inuit. They don't just live here. They understand this land in a way outsiders never could. They can read the signs in the snow. They know the paths the animals migrate. They know when a storm is coming before the sky even changes color. And in Tlingit culture, there is a creature they call the Kushtaka. It is a shape-shifting demon, half man, half otter, capable of mimicking the cries of a child or a woman in distress to lure the lost deeper into the forest. The story of the Kushtaka is more than just a myth. It's how the native people pass down survival knowledge from one generation to the next. Don't go alone. Don't trust strange sounds. And never leave the path you know. The first Europeans to set foot in Alaska were the Russians. In 1741, the explorer Vitus Bering, a Dane working for the Russian Tsar, led an expedition across the strait that bears his name and landed on the southern coast of Alaska. He died before he could return. The Russians quickly realized this land held something incredibly valuable: fur, especially sea otter pelts, the finest fur in the world, worth more than gold in the courts of Europe. They established trading posts, forced the indigenous people to hunt, and began exploiting Alaska as a remote colony. But the Russian Empire ultimately couldn't maintain a presence in a place so distant, so expensive, and so difficult to control. In 1867, Tsar Alexander II sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million. That's about 2 cents an acre. The Americans called it Seward's Icebox, after Secretary of State William Seward, who convinced Congress to approve the deal. The press ridiculed him. They asked why anyone would buy a land of just snow and bears. They didn't understand they had just purchased one of the richest lands on Earth. But before America understood that, another wave of people rushed to Alaska in search of something they thought would make them rich overnight. In 1896, news of a gold strike in the Klondike region spread across America like wildfire, and Alaska was the gateway to the Klondike. Within 2 years, over 100,000 people stampeded north. They brought with them dreams of riches. They did not bring enough food, enough knowledge, or enough respect for the land they were entering. The Chilkoot Pass, the main route to the Klondike, was over 50 kilometers long and crossed mountain passes higher than 1,000 meters. The Canadian authorities required each person to carry at least a ton of supplies before being allowed to cross. 1 ton. People had to make multiple trips, climbing up and down the mountain in snow and wind to move their goods piece by piece. In April of 1898, an avalanche struck the Chilkoot Pass. In just a few seconds, nearly 70 people were dead. But even those who survived largely failed. Of the 100,000 who set out, only about 30,000 actually made it to the goldfields. And of those, most found no gold. The major claims were already in the hands of those who had arrived first. The newcomers were left with nothing but rock and disappointment. Alaska doesn't care about your dreams. It only cares if you are strong enough to survive. But why is Alaska so important that these struggles for it never cease? Why did Russia, the United States, and hundreds of thousands of individuals from all over the world all want a piece of this land? The answer lies in geography. Look at a world map. Not the flat map you usually see, but a proper globe. Look down from above, over the North Pole. When you look at it that way, you see something strange. Alaska isn't at the edge of the world. It's at the center of the Northern Hemisphere. From Anchorage, you can fly to Tokyo in about 8 hours and 30 minutes. To Moscow in about 9 hours. To London in about 9 hours and 30 minutes. Alaska is a point nearly equidistant to all the major power centers of the world. During the Cold War, this was of vital importance. If the Soviet Union wanted to attack the United States with missiles or bombers, the shortest route was not across the Pacific or the Atlantic. The shortest route was over the North Pole. And the path over the North Pole leads directly to Alaska. This transformed Alaska from a remote wasteland into America's first line of defense. During the 1950s and 1960s, the US built a network of radar stations along Alaska's coasts and mountains, the DEW Line Early Warning System. Dozens of military bases sprang up. Airstrips were built where no roads had existed before. For the first time in history, Alaska was truly strategically important. But it wasn't just about military significance. Beneath Alaska's soil lies one of North America's largest oil fields. The Prudhoe Bay oil field, discovered in 1968, holds reserves of up to 25 billion barrels of oil. To extract it, one of the most incredible engineering feats of the 20th century had to be built. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, nearly 1,300 kilometers long, crossing 3 mountain ranges, hundreds of rivers, and thousands of kilometers of permafrost. The Alaskan seas are no less important. Over 50% of the entire US seafood catch comes from Alaskan waters. Salmon, cod, king crab. Fishing vessels operate in conditions most sailors in the world would not dare to attempt. But all those resources, all that strategic value, came at a price. And that price began to reveal itself on a day Alaskans would never forget. The spring of 1964 arrived in Alaska like any other year. The snow began to melt. The rivers began to flow. People began to think of the short but precious summer days ahead. On March 27th, 1964, it was Good Friday. At 5:36 in the afternoon, the ground in Alaska shuddered. Not figuratively. The ground literally shuddered. A 9.2 magnitude earthquake, the most powerful ever recorded in North America and second only in human history, shook Alaska for a full 4 minutes and 30 seconds. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Most of the strongest earthquakes last only about 30 seconds. 4 minutes and 30 seconds is long enough for you to realize that what is happening has no clear end. The ground in some areas shifted by as much as 18 meters horizontally. Houses were swallowed as the ground beneath them liquefied, like dipping a biscuit into a cup of tea. The streets of Anchorage split wide open. High-rise buildings swayed like pencils in the wind. But the most terrifying thing was not the earthquake itself. The most terrifying thing was what came after. Within minutes, a tsunami formed from underwater landslides at the bottom of Prince William Sound. Not one wave. Multiple waves, one after another. The town of Valdez, a quiet little seaport of about 1,000 people, was wiped out in minutes. The entire harbourfront collapsed into the sea as the earth beneath it slid into the ocean. People standing on the shore watched as the docks, the cranes, the houses, and the people standing on them vanished into the water in an instant. In the village of Chenega, a small native community of 76 people, a tsunami wave over 20 meters high crashed ashore. In a matter of seconds, 23 of the 76 villagers were dead, nearly 1/3 of the entire village's population. The survivors had to flee to the mountains. They watched from above as their village ceased to exist. The village of Chenega was not rebuilt for over 20 years. The interval between the earthquake and the first wave striking the shore was, in many places, only a few minutes. Not enough time to evacuate, not enough time to run, only enough time to realize what was happening. A total of 129 people died. That was the official count. But those who know Alaska understand that in a land so vast, with isolated communities unconnected by roads, the true figure may never be fully known. But 1964 was not the last time Alaska reminded humanity of its true place in the natural order. Several years after the earthquake, on March 24th, 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez struck a submerged reef in Prince William Sound, not far from Valdez. Over 40 million liters of oil spilled into the sea, polluting more than 2,000 kilometers of coastline, killing hundreds of thousands of marine creatures, and destroying the fishing industry for thousands of families for many years. That event occurred in the very waters people once believed they had conquered. Alaska is not something you conquer. You can only try to survive alongside it. And this is something few people outside of Alaska know. When the 1964 earthquake struck, news traveled to the rest of the United States much more slowly than it does today. Some of Alaska's coastal communities had virtually no contact with the outside world for days after the disaster. And this was not purely a matter of technology. It was a matter of geography. Alaska has over 33,000 kilometers of coastline, more than the coastlines of the lower 48 states combined. But only about 20% of Alaska's towns and villages are accessible by road. The rest can only be reached by small aircraft, boat, or, in the winter, by ice roads across frozen rivers. Even the state capital, Juneau, is not on the road system. Juneau is the only US state capital that cannot be reached by car from the rest of the country. You have to fly, or take a ferry in. There is no other choice. What does this mean in daily life? The price of food in remote villages can be 3 times higher than in major cities. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, a box of cereal. Everything has to be flown in by small aircraft. And when the weather turns bad, when a blizzard blankets the region, those flights are grounded. There are communities in Alaska where, in the middle of winter, if bad weather persists, the food supply can be cut off for an entire week. And in that darkness, both literal and metaphorical, people disappear. Returning to the Alaska Triangle, October 16th, 1972. A small aircraft took off from Anchorage with 4 people on board. 2 of them were some of America's most important politicians. Hale Boggs, the US House Majority Leader, and Nick Begich, the congressman representing Alaska. The flight was only supposed to go to Juneau, not a great distance. The weather at the time was normal. The plane vanished. No distress signal, No communication indicating trouble. There were no clues as to what happened. It simply vanished from the radar. The United States launched one of the largest search and rescue operations in its history. 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, 39 days of searching across an area of over 80,000 square kilometers, a region larger than the entire state of Maine. Over 3,600 search hours. They found nothing. No debris. No oil slick on the water. No sign of the 4 individuals. They had simply ceased to exist. To this day, that disappearance remains unexplained. And it was not an isolated incident. In 1950, a military aircraft with 44 people on board vanished without a trace. In 1990, a Cessna 340 with 4 passengers vanished. In 2013, Alan Foster, a pilot with nearly 10,000 hours of flight experience, vanished from radar screens right after takeoff. No one found him. No one found the plane. Since 1988, more than 16,000 people have disappeared in the Alaska Triangle. The disappearance rate here is double the US national average. Conspiracy theorists talk about magnetic vortexes, hidden underground alien bases in Fairbanks, and mysterious electromagnetic radiation. They tell of JAL Flight 1686 in 1986, when a Japanese passenger plane reported being chased by 3 unidentified flying objects while passing through this region. But the real explanation, according to scientists, is simpler and, in a way, even more terrifying. It's the geography. Massive glaciers are filled with crevasses and caves hidden beneath fresh snow. A plane that crashes into one can be buried within hours. A hiker slips into a glacial crevasse, and when new snow covers it, there is nothing left to find. In 1947, an aircraft named Stardust disappeared in the Andes Mountains, Argentina. People searched, but found nothing. 50 years later, 2 climbers found its wreckage protruding from a glacier. The glacier had moved and pushed it out after half a century. The same thing is happening in Alaska. Planes and people are swallowed by glaciers and held for decades before the snow and ice gradually release them. Nature is not irrational. It is just cold and unforgiving. Today, Alaska has a population of about 730,000 people. Nearly half of them live concentrated in the Anchorage metropolitan area. The rest of the state, over 1.7 million square kilometers, is shared by about 400,000 people and more than 30,000 brown bears. More than 30,000 brown bears, which is more than the total brown bear population of the entire lower 48 states combined. That means for every 21 Alaskans, there is 1 bear. And that's not to mention thousands of wolves, caribou, and bald eagles. People joke that Alaska has 3 seasons: winter, breakup, and road construction. And all 3 are harsh. But Alaska is still Alaska. The state has over 100,000 glaciers, accounting for more than half of the world's non-polar glacial ice area. Denali, at 6,190 meters, is the highest peak in North America. It's not just a mountain. It is an independent weather entity creating its own storms. Climbers from around the world come to conquer Denali, and the rate of not returning is much higher than they think. The Prudhoe Bay oil field is still in operation, although its output has gradually declined. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline still runs from the Arctic coast down to the port of Valdez in the south, an engineering marvel built under conditions many engineers initially deemed impossible. US military bases are still located in Alaska, even though the Cold War ended decades ago. The reason hasn't changed. Alaska remains the closest point of US territory to Russia and China. In a world where geopolitical tensions can escalate at any moment, Alaska is still the first outpost. And the Alaska Triangle? Every year, thousands of people still go missing. Alaska's search and rescue teams are the busiest organizations in the United States by area. They know that for every person they find, there are many others that nature has hidden too well for them to locate. Alaska reminds us of something that the modern world has made us easily forget. Humans are the most intelligent beings on this planet. We build cities, we launch ships into space, we connect the entire world through an undersea cable at the bottom of the ocean. We think we have conquered nature. But there are places on Earth where nature has never agreed with that. Alaska is one of those places. It is not hostile to humans. It does not try to drive you away. It simply exists according to its own laws, Laws that existed for millions of years before humans appeared and will continue to exist for millions of years after we are gone. When you look at a map of Alaska, you see a vast, nearly empty expanse. It's not because humans haven't tried. It's because nature here does not negotiate. And perhaps that is precisely why Alaska, though formidable, remains one of the most beautiful and astonishing places on Earth. Because it is one of the few places where nature still holds ultimate control. That is not a failure of humanity. It is proof that the Earth still holds things greater than ourselves.